Okay, thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for that excellent panel to get us started. And I want to welcome everybody for our keynote conversation with Deputy Secretary Kurt Campbell. In my mind, there is no single individual who has done more to prioritize and to innovate U.S. policy in Asia than Kurt. During the Obama administration, as Assistant Secretary, he authored the Pivot to Asia, saying that America's strategic future was in Asia, not in two wars in the Middle East, not even arguably in Europe. The doctrine stated that the United States must reorient its resources, its personnel, and its expertise, and its policies and strategies to prioritizing Asia and U.S. allies in the Indo-Pacific. During the Biden administration, as White House coordinator, he oversaw some of the most consequential changes in our alliance structure in Asia, including the Quad, AUKUS, Camp David, U.S.-Japan Philippines, partners in the Blue Pacific, IPEF, and others that I don't have the time to mention. The innovation that he has authored does not exclude Korea, where we saw the expansion of the alliance's scope to include supply chains, chips, quantum, AI, outer space. And on the security side, we saw the creation of the Washington Declaration, a singular document about U.S. commitment that will stand next to the Mutual Defense Treaty from now on into the future. And of course, a nuclear consultative group designed to bolster nuclear deterrence. I'm sorry to embarrass him like this, but I am an author on U.S. history and the history of U.S. alliances in Asia, and I really do believe that your name will sit alongside others like George Shultz, and even before him, John Foster Dulles, as some of our most consequential strategists of U.S. policy in Asia. So, everyone, please welcome the 22nd Deputy Secretary of State, Kurt Campbell.
I do want to say it's an incredibly kind and undeserved introduction, but just like 20 minutes ago, our team, we're trying to find our car and can't figure out how to get over here. So it can be humbling at the same time. So thank you, Victor.
Thanks, Kurt. So starting off with the alliance, you've just come off of, there were the meetings in Peru and APEC, the G20. President Biden, Prime Minister Ishida, President Yun had a brief meeting trying to continue the Trilateral Leaders Summit established at Camp David. So in that respect on trilaterals, and I just wanted to ask you two things. The first is, in retrospect, how difficult was it to establish the Camp David Trilateral? And then second, going forward, I know you've done a great deal to institutionalize this relationship. Are you confident that it will continue?
Yeah. So thank you, Victor. The other, I think, more recent innovation that we have seen, which is the IP4 countries, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, their role in engaging partners at NATO in Europe is increasingly significant. And again, this is another example of the leading role that South Korea, that the ROK has played more generally. I do just want to take a moment to welcome all of our friends from Korea. It's wonderful to see you here. It's great that you're engaging so intensively and intensely during this critical moment. Transitions are important times in the United States, and it's important to get your voice in. There's no better way or place to do that than here at CSIS. I do believe that the trilateral engagement between the United States, Japan, and South Korea is one of the most deeply consequential strategic innovations of modern times. And I think the primary driver of that over the course of the last couple of years, in fact, has been President Yoon. And he was the one who originally, I think, took the decision to drive both his bureaucracy and to challenge Japan in a way that you rarely see on the global stage. True political courage is a hard thing. And what was impressive, Victor, about that was that after initially being uncertain, Prime Minister Kishida, I think, began to respond, and they began to build a degree of momentum to help lead us to Camp David, and then a number of subsequent engagements, and again, just a couple of days ago, as you indicate. Victor knows this because he was directly involved with it. There were a number of us that worked for years in advance of the Camp David agreement to try to find that common space that would allow the three countries to work together. Much of that work was done quietly behind the scenes. Some of it actually involved shuttle diplomacy during periods where South Korean and Japanese friends felt maybe a bit uncomfortable meeting. I cannot pretend and tell you that those deliberations were always easy, but I think it's an important lesson to all of us that in many respects, one of the most important ingredients in subsequent success is years or periods of intense failure, where you keep trying, you keep working, and you're persistent. So we worked with the previous Korean government, with previous Japanese governments on trying to find a way to think about how the three-way relationship can move forward. And, you know, I will say that the Camp David effort was substantial, but we've seen subsequently concerns in all three countries. There has been political challenge to it, politically in Korea and in Japan. And frankly, I think even in the United States, questions about, is this really what the United States should be focused on more directly? I believe without question, if we want to affect the dynamic of an increasingly uncertain Asia, if the United States, Japan, and South Korea are more fully aligned politically and strategically, Victor, it is the most stabilizing signal that we can affect in contemporary Asia. And so my deep hope is that it will be continued. I know Secretary Blinken is in discussions with Secretary of State nominee Senator Rubio. Our goal will be to try to explain what elements of strategy, which frankly have been largely bipartisan, deserve continued engagement and investment. And I would put this very much at the extreme top of the list.
So can I just drill down on that last point a little bit? I mean, if we look around the world today, there's a lot of things going on that raise questions that make all leaders very concerned about their external environment. And the Korea-Japan relationship is one way that these two allies are looking for security, but it's very difficult to imagine security interests being served if the United States were less present in the region, in the world. Perhaps you could say a little bit about how your administration looked at the importance of the U.S. presence. Obviously, in terms of getting allies to work together, organizing groups, but our physical presence in the region, long-standing, is an important symbol of our commitment and credibility.
So, Victor, I would argue, and I think probably you would as well, that one of the essential features, our ticket to the big game, has been the bipartisan determination in the United States to remain forward deployed and forward engaged across Asia. What has been an important ingredient of recent diplomacy, military diplomacy, is the redistribution of some of our assets, which have been largely positioned in Northeast Asia, to other engagements in Southeast Asia and in Australia. I think that effort is extraordinarily important, but at the core of our military engagement are our rock-solid alliances with both Japan and South Korea. And after decades of really having to work and making the domestic arguments about why forward deployed American engagement is essential to the maintenance and peace and stability, that battle has largely been achieved in both Japan and the ROK. We've recently concluded extraordinarily generous and gracious host nation support arrangements with both Japan and South Korea, the ROK, signaling the determination to keep the United States forward engaged and deployed. My hope would be that the wisdom of that would be fully appreciated in a new administration. I can't underscore enough that the commitment of this forward deployment is bipartisan. We have very strong Republican support on Capitol Hill to sustain that. And I would just say, Victor, you and I both worked on this extraordinarily important, dynamic, and complex region. This is a period where Asian interlocutors, our partners and friends, are looking for elements of commitment and stability. They want to see the United States as a constant and not a variable. Now, obviously, transitions are challenging periods. The hope will be you have key players that are going to be coming into the administration, the new Trump administration advisors that understand the significance and importance of the Indo-Pacific. And my hope will be that determination, that forward momentum, that the work done in the Biden administration was built on what came before in the Trump administration, the Bush administration, the Obama administration. We've managed to be able to build on consecutive efforts, and my hope that will continue. I think any effort that would look to substantially remove U.S. forces or change the nature of our fundamental commitments to the Indo-Pacific, if that happened at this juncture, I think it would be contrary to American strategic interests.
Great, thank you. Your administration restored trust in the U.S. as a reliable partner, reaffirmed commitments, built all these new structures that benefit the United States as well as allies and partners. We mentioned the Washington Declaration and the NCG earlier. CSIS, we did a strategic elite poll in the aftermath of your creation of these two things that showed nearly 70% of strategic elites in South Korea did not agree with the proposition that South Korea should acquire nuclear weapons, which at least suggested to us that what you were doing was working. But the question going forward is, how resilient is that sort of view and the future of the NCG? So any thoughts you have on that would be great.
So Victor, one of the things that I think that you well understand, that the elements of a strong commitment to extended deterrence cannot be underscored on a singular or a one-time basis. It is a continual set of propositions. It needs to evolve. You need to be cognizant of strategic circumstances. I think what we've seen of late are deeply provocative actions on the part of the DPRK and Chairman Kim. And so it is extraordinarily important that at every level that the United States stand by the ROK, send the strongest possible messages of not only reassurance, but strategic deterrence. And so that means continual deployments. That means close consultations at every level. It means the continuation of critical exercises. We are underway now a very important exercise, naval largely, but underscoring those commitments are essential as we go forward. I will say that the challenges on the nuclear side in the Indo-Pacific are real. You have a massive buildup on the part of China, largely undeclared, unexplained, but probably over the course of the next decade, which will be one of the most substantial nuclear buildups of modern times. You have a country in Russia that has used nuclear saber rattling on a regular basis in a way that has clearly rattled nerves in certain countries. And you've got a North Korea that is determined to continue to refine its nuclear and missile capabilities. All those things buffet the strategic consciousness of the countries in the Indo-Pacific, and it is essential for the United States to be absolutely rock solid in our commitment to extended deterrence. If one country thought about reconsidering its nuclear options, it would likely lead to a chain of reconsiderations across the Indo-Pacific that I think ultimately would undermine security in ways that are not in our strategic interests.
Yeah, and I should say, of course, that both Foreign Minister Park and former National Security Advisor Kim Sung-han played critical roles in the creation of the declaration and the NCG. So
I wouldn't say critical, I would say driving roles. I do want to just take a moment to tell everyone in the audience that what has really changed in the diplomacy of the Indo-Pacific, it was often the case that it was the United States that came in with strategic ideas, with views, and then it was left to Japan and South Korea to respond or to react. That has changed in a profound way. We see strategic initiative taken time and time again in Seoul and Tokyo, and it's the United States often that is reacting to good and strategic initiatives that have been put forward by our partners. If I can tell you, Victor, that is the most healthy development that I have seen. The true recognition that we are engaging in many respects as equals, and that strategic initiative is not the sole domain of the United States. Other allies and partners are basically advancing strategic concepts in important ways.
Very good point. You mentioned North Korea previously, and I thought we could just dig in a little bit on that. I mean, the administration, again, has done a remarkable job, but one place where you have not been able to move the ball, the diplomatic ball, has been with North Korea. I mean, this is not for lack of trying. As I know, you've tried very hard to try to establish a dialogue, but with their new relationship with Russia, there's arguably less need for them to talk to the United States. But meanwhile, their weapons program is growing with potentially Russian help in breaking through technology ceilings for them in return for supplies of ammunition and thousands of troops for the war in Ukraine. So two questions here. The first is, how do we stifle the flow of North Korean troops to Russia? And then the second is, what is your outlook on just denuclearization diplomacy going forward?
So let me take the second question first, if I can, Victor. I think it would be fair to say that since the discussions between President Trump and Kim Jong-un in Vietnam were ended abruptly. Now that's almost 6.5 years ago. Since then, since that moment, we've had virtually no diplomatic engagement with the DPRK. We have tried. We've tried to offer humanitarian support during COVID. We've tried other sorts of engagement. I think most of that has been for naught. We're not alone in attempting diplomacy. Japan and the ROK have also tried, a couple of different governments. I think now what we see is a situation in which increasingly the partnership between the DPRK and Russia is growing deeper and more concerning. We've seen the deployment of frontline DPRK troops into the campaign zone around Kursk. We have seen a substantial amount of engagement militarily and now industrially between Russia and the DPRK. It appears in many respects that the dominant relationship that China once enjoyed with DPRK has been usurped by a more consequential partnership between the DPRK and Russia. That has caused some concerns in Beijing. I mean, this new element is something that must be addressed. I'm not going to advance further what President Biden said yesterday in Latin America. I would simply say that the United States, NATO partners take this very seriously, and we're determined to respond. The future of diplomacy with the DPRK is anyone's question. And in the current environment, I'm not sure what's going to be possible that would cause the DPRK to want to re-engage with the United States. We've heard a lot about the possible resumption of some sort of engagement at the leader level between President Trump and elect Trump and Kim Jong-un. Remember that even during that previous period, the basis of diplomacy was on the continuing idea of a denuclearization of North Korea and the Korean Peninsula. I'm not sure that Kim Jong-un would accept those conditions going forward. And so I think, Asia's full of question marks. And that's one of the big questions the next period ahead. Our most important response to provocations from the DPRK have been in the arena of trilateral engagement. And we have the level of our coordination and deterrence efforts and communication have increased exponentially in the last 4 or 5 years. We've also brought other countries together to engage on joint steps that can be taken to make sure that deterrence is robust. But I still think the challenge from North Korea is deeply concerning, and it is clearly in the strategic interests of all concerned to signal that this deployment of North Korean forces into the battle zone in Europe is provocative and destabilizing.
Yeah. Just so you mentioned China, just very quickly, because I know you have to go. You've had many interactions with the Chinese. Do you feel like they have lost control of North Korea? I mean, that they, the extent that they had any control in the first place, Russia seems to figure much more prominently on the DPRK radar screen. So do you get any sense that the Chinese feel like they have no control over the situation anymore?
Victor, it's an excellent question. And, what often happens in high-level diplomacy between the United States and China, you move through a series of issues of conversation, whether it's on, complaints from China on U.S. technology policy or policy on Taiwan Strait, and you move through them, and they're often mood changes or, kind of different stances as you cycle through the various topics. The topic that is becoming increasingly uncomfortable for Chinese interlocutors really is the DPRK engagement with Russia. In some of the discussions that we've had, it seems that we're informing China of things that they were unaware of, actually, with respect to DPRK pursuits. And I think they are concerned that Russian encouragement may cause the DPRK to contemplate either actions or military developments that are not in China's interests. So I think to date, we've not seen China weigh in directly with what we've witnessed between the DPRK and Russia. But we do believe that increasing coordination between Pyongyang and Moscow is unnerving. And we will continue to press China to make the case that what the DPRK is doing is destabilizing and dangerous. I will say, even though that is the case, China continues to come back to the sort of worn propositions that it is the failure of the United States and other countries to reach out effectively to the DPRK that has led us to the stalemate that we are experiencing now. But they don't really have very much beyond that. To be honest, Victor, one of the things that's different between now and during your period, remember, during periods in the six-party talks, we would have very detailed and intense discussions about peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. That period of more intimate diplomacy between the United States and China on developments in the DPRK is really no more.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I know you have to go, so just to finish up, if you could, so you've spent many years in government working on these issues, a lot of sacrifices. It's not easy. It's tough work. In retrospect, anything that if you could do it over again that you would do, or anything in particular that you remember as a highlight or a low light in your time in office? I know that you still have a couple of months of work left to do, but any personal reflection?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm proud of the work that the administration has done, and one of the things that I think people need to understand about government is that it really is a team sport. I appreciate the nice compliments, but there are so many people that are involved in this. What I can give, I think, Asian and other interlocutors a comfort in, like you, Victor, I've worked on the Indo-Pacific a long time. In the past, it was often just a few individuals that were driving policy. I think the sense of really an army, or I prefer to say it, a navy of people are engaged increasingly on the Indo-Pacific element of our strategy. I think that is undeniable now. It's hard, at the end of administration, you look back over what you've done, where you've been, and like the challenges. I remember first coming into government, we were tested for COVID every single day. Yeah. If you were ever caught without a mask, you got demerits and stuff. Incredibly difficult period. I just can't help think about this. 4 years ago during the inauguration, Washington was a encampment. We had security fences and military patrols throughout Washington. I never in a million years thought that would be something that we would experience. And I have to say, at least this time, we're doing everything possible in the administration to make this a smooth transition, to try to be prepared to answer any questions, and to hopefully in certain areas instill the importance of continuity. I would say that the one area where we've seen very substantial bipartisan joint efforts has been in the Indo-Pacific, and I'm proud of that. And some of the people that have led the charge, Senator Hagerty, Senator Young, Senator Sullivan, Senator Rubio, these are all people that are playing a key role in sustaining this U.S. driving effort in the Indo-Pacific. So my hope is that elements of that will continue. All I can tell you is that in all my briefings, I try to underscore how much we tried to build on certain elements of the Trump administration approach, and that hopefully that will continue as we go forward. So it's probably too early to say, what are you really regretting or feeling, any remorse about. I feel like it's been a pretty good run, and I'm proud and grateful for the people I've worked with. I will say, Victor, the role you played helping so much, giving us counsel behind the scenes. Grateful for all our ROK friends that are here. If I could give one piece of counsel to colleagues who are here, I think one of the things that we learned during the last transition was the importance of early and deep engagement. Even though President Trump has been reelected with a very substantial domestic commitment, there are still elements of his policy globally that will have to come into focus. And one of the things that was most impressive about Prime Minister Abe was his determination to get in and to make that case. I will simply say that I've worked with a lot of leaders. I've rarely seen a leader more effective in engaging on the world stage as President Yoon. And I'm very encouraging of President Yoon and his team to get in early, make the argument for partnership, make the argument about why South Korea is such a stalwart friend of the United States, and that the United States and the ROK can count on each other. And so I'm hopeful that that takes place, and I think that will put us in good stead as we go forward.
That's a great message on which to end. So, Kurt, thank you so much for your time, for all of your work and service. Ladies and gentlemen, Deputy Secretary Kurt Campbell.